It is said that every crisis holds both danger and opportunity. Many stories have been told of the dangers of hurricane season 2005. This story is about an opportunity to serve, and how it was used by the Maritime Administration and the American Merchant Marine. Hurricane Katrina's pounding of the Gulf Coast left New Orleans flooded and without electrical power. The Port of New Orleans was inoperable, with no power for cranes or computers. Port Director Gary LaGrange was trying to find first aid supplies and realized that they might be available on 2 ships belonging to the U.S. Department of Transportation's Maritime Administration, the Cape Kennedy and the Cape Knox, which weathered the hurricane in their home port of New Orleans. He called Acting Maritime Administrator John Jamian.
The power was obviously down. The entire city was underwater and pretty much wiped out, no electricity. He was in his office, the lights were out, he had no light other than a flashlight. He was calling me on a cell phone and he said, "John, I don't know how long this phone call is going to last, but I need first aid supplies. Is there anything you can do?"
And it was John who was a very calming factor. Having been a former port director at Detroit and in Wayne County, I think John understood what was going through my mind at the time, or perhaps understood even better what should be going through my mind at the time.
I said, "Gary," I said, "what you really need to do is step back for a second and think about what it is, not that you need right now, but what it is you're going to continue to need to help bring things back online."
I said, "Well, what do you mean? What do you mean?" And his words to me were, "Well, you need to run the port. What's it going to take to get the port back up, and what can MARAD do to help you get your port back online?"
He came back and said, "The number one pressing need that I have is getting my workers back to the docks." Obviously, his docks had sustained damage, and there were some issues about the capabilities of what that port could put out or take in. But the real issue is that the workers at those docks lived in that city, and that hurricane affected them too. Many of those workers lost their homes, their families were dispersed.
First, the acting administrator offered the asked-for medical supplies and the use of the 2 MARAD ships as headquarters. So the Port of New Orleans set up shop on the Cape Kennedy. Other people had already moved on, so Chief Steward Eddie Taylor found that he suddenly had many more people to feed.
I can't recall how many people it was. I just know it was a lot of people there. I mean, I have my family here, plus the guys from the other ship next door, the Cape Knox there. They had their families here. Their cook was trapped in Houston and couldn't get in, so I was taking care of both ships there. Then after the storm, all I know is that people just started coming in, and we were like a hotel service there, and it just, I didn't have time to think there. I just had time to just cook there and, and keep it clean and do the best I could there.
People at MARAD set about getting other ships of the Ready Reserve Force activated to help in the Gulf Coast. The RRF's primary use is supporting movements of the armed forces, moving materiel around the world. The ships had sometimes been activated for humanitarian missions overseas, but never for a domestic emergency. That doesn't mean the people who run the program hadn't thought about it.
Our folks here at the Maritime Administration who oversee the RRF program had always pitched the concept of being able to use these vessels for a multitude of different reasons. And anyone who's ever been to sea knows the versatility of these ships. So they were preparing, and actually they had already had in their back pocket a lot of it, and the different capabilities the vessels had.
We've had it in our back pocket for a long time. And actually the requesting instruments, the documents that we sent over, I had already had them drafted up from years ago from when we looked at similar situations that happened. It was kind of like we knew the possibility existed that we could do this, and so we were ready to go. We had done exercises or that, so we had some preps along those lines.
Secretary of Transportation Norman Mineta had to request Department of Defense concurrence to activate the RRF ships. Friday night of Labor Day weekend, he made the request. Also, on Labor Day weekend, Secretary Rumsfeld concurred.
The Department of Defense concurrence, and it was pretty high level. I remember seeing the instrument. We had the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Assistant Secretary of Defense, Secretary of the Navy, Transportation Command, That all greased in about 48 hours. That approval came through. That was phenomenal to me.
Next, MARAD worked with the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, who would have to oversee operations and be the contracting entity. FEMA grasped the concept, and soon the ships of the RRF and other components of MARAD's National Defense Reserve Fleet were on their way. The first ship in arrived from Houston, the crane ship Diamond State.
That first ship was like the Marine Corps hitting the beach. It was flying a flag, and I can tell you, it was the greatest thing, the greatest sight that I've probably ever seen. I'll never see a sight like that, maybe ever again. It was hope. It represented hope. It wasn't, the ship's name wasn't Hope, but it represented hope. And that was huge.
Soon more ships came in. Wright from Baltimore, Equality State from Orange, Texas, and 3 training ships from state maritime academies, Sirius from Texas, the Empire State from New York, and the state of Maine.
It was just horrific to see the destruction in the lower river. And that remains today. The lower river has not come back at all because everything was just totally destroyed. There's nothing left down there. It was just before dusk when we came up here and started to tie up at the dock. And you could see there were lights down in some of the taller buildings, not totally lit up, but around the perimeter of the taller buildings in the downtown area, there were some lights. But the rest of the area was just pitch black. It was just, as night came on, it was just totally black. There was nothing there. We were the only thing lit up. It was amazing.
Soon the ships started to fill up with longshore workers, security workers, members of the National Guard, Coast Guard, FEMA workers, American Armed Forces Exchange Service, police officers doing recovery work, and chaplains.
This has been terrific for us and the facilities, just the little things, a laundry, a mess, a hot shower. Our days don't start at 9 and end at 5, and to be able to come and go and work in that type of environment, it's a big help and keeps a lot of stress off of us as well.
It's been a world of difference here. Without the Miriam ships, we could not be in operation. We could not have manned the vessels because we wouldn't have had any place to live.
Months after Katrina, there were still few places to live. The Ninth Ward in New Orleans was still devastated, still deserted. The same was true next door in St. Bernard Parish, home to the port of St. Bernard.
The entire parish was flooded. Every single house in the parish sustained severe damage, and there is not presently a livable house anywhere in the parish. So we went from an extremely active port to a port that was not able to cater for our people in any way. Many of our people, in fact the majority of the people working at this facility, lost their homes in the flood. So they and their families were displaced from this area. I would have to speak very, very highly of our port staff and people here because the majority of our people came back to work. The unfortunate thing is we could not start any activities here in this area because there are no services available. There was no housing, there was no food. We could not cater for them nor ask them to come into this area because of the housing situation.
The Ready Reserve Force ship Cape Vincent came up the Mississippi on one aid mission and stayed to house trailers, which in turn housed workers for the port. Within days, the Port of St. Bernard was back at work, loading and unloading ships, working again as a driver for the area's economic recovery, restoring commercial mobility on the vital national artery that is the Mississippi River. The presence of the Cape Vincent gave workers and the port a chance to move back toward normal activity and normal life. An important driver in the nation's economy is the refining and delivery of petroleum products. The ConocoPhillips refinery at Belle Chase, Louisiana, is one of the largest in the state. The refinery needed housing and feeding for large numbers of workers in order to get going again. The training ship Empire State gave them what they needed, even though it wasn't exactly what the captain was used to doing.
I'm a merchant marine captain, used to carrying cargo and running around the world. I've been pretty much specifically on military contracts. This job entailed just basically taking an empty ship that had the ability to sleep, hundreds of normally cadets, but hundreds of passengers or guests. In this case, Katrina, people that, relief workers that needed a place to stay and food to eat and, regular hotel services. So we came here, and whereas I might normally have on my ship a steward department of 5, on here I had a steward department of 40.
And that staff of 40 served thousands of meals. The ship couldn't accommodate everyone they needed to feed, so they coordinated taking prepared food to the refinery and setting up under a tent, often feeding more than 1,000 people at lunchtime. Stewards' departments on all the activated ships were constantly cooking, cleaning, moving, and changing. There was more to hurricane season than Katrina. When Rita roared through, the Ready Reserve Force ships in Beaumont, Texas, took on board more than 300 emergency vehicles from the surrounding area. They weathered the storm in Beaumont, and when it was over, the vehicles rolled off the ships, safe, sound, and ready to work. The Texas Clipper II, which had been moored in the National Defense Reserve Fleet in Beaumont, was pressed back into service in Lake Charles, Louisiana. Damage from Rita was extensive in southwestern Louisiana. Lake Charles handles food exports and lumber exports from South America. The port has a 30-mile-long dredged approach channel. And the Director of Navigation and Security for the port says the Army Corps of Engineers got the channel dredged quickly. He adds that although he's a University of Texas man himself, he was very glad to see the ship from Texas A&M.
So we needed to rapidly have a place for labor to stay, and that's how the Aggies showed up and helped us out. The ship is nearly full as we speak, and starting this week we still had a little bit of room left. We're housing some McNeese students. McNeese State University students are on board. The entire community has enjoyed the use of this facility, so it's not just laborers. We have housed some law enforcement folks and city employees from several cities around here that have enjoyed the several hundred berths and very good food, by the way, that's being provided here by MARAD and FEMA.
Some McNeese University students came from places such as Indonesia or West Africa, too far away to get back home. Some, such as Bradley Starr, had a choice between losing a scholarship and living on the street. Longtime Lake Charles resident Helen Dusier's home was destroyed.
It's a mobile home, and a big old oak tree fell right down the middle of it and split it in half. Totally destroyed everything. I work at the port, and they had said a ship was coming in, so the first thing I did was call the directors and told them I want on that ship. Good. So it's not a cruise ship, but it's home.
Providing a home away from home in the midst of devastation took more than good intentions. It required coordination of several federal agencies, working the complexities of a disrupted transportation system, as well as coordinating efforts and keeping communication channels open. It required people in Washington and also people in regional offices. Many of these people had to be evacuated, some of them twice. One of them was Susan Schaefer, who worked at the Baton Rouge Joint Field Office, coordinating the work between MARAD and FEMA.
It was interesting and it was very rewarding to be able to come in and show the other agencies under DOT who we are and our importance in DOT. And I have to say that we have, gained a lot of respect from the other agencies in DOT as well as FEMA and others by how we have been able to participate in the Katrina relief.
As with any drama involving thousands of people, there are thousands of stories of friendships forged and hardships overcome. The ships MARAD sent provided supplies, water, support for oil spill cleanup, generation of electricity. There were hundreds of instances of ingenuity, some of which came from the uniqueness of the situation, and some of which came from the talents and experience of merchant mariners, who have a long tradition of coming to the aid of those in need.
Fortunately, seamen are adaptable by nature. We have to deal with all kinds of stuff all the time, and we just deal with it because nobody else to help you. And simple things like barbershop. We had, I guess it would be a sister-in-law of one of the guys that was staying on board who was a beautician. She came down, set up a chair on the dock, and cut hair out in the dock one day because everybody needed a haircut. We've been here for a month and nobody'd been to a barbershop. There weren't any barbershops. So simple things like that you just don't take for granted, you know, that you have to find a way to do it. We did.
Many of the cities along the Gulf Coast grew up around their ports. It was the port that was the earliest driver of the economic engine. 2 months after the double whammy from Katrina and Rita, the ports were beginning to drive the work of recovery. All told, MARAD ships served the Gulf Coast recovery effort for more than 6 months, from the time Katrina hit in August of 2005 until the last 3 ships left at the beginning of March 2006.
The single biggest factor to bringing the city of New Orleans back was first the port coming back so early and unexpectedly. And there's only one reason why the port was able to come back, and it was the Maritime Administration.
MARAD made the difference.
It's a natural now that follows that we're working closer with FEMA and trying to be involved in the upfront planning, and that's so maritime transportation, the use of ships, and that people have seen the proof from Katrina. They know what they can do, Katrina and Rita, and we're able to put that planning to good use, hopefully for the next time. So we're not trying to rediscover each other. We already have an established relationship, and it's proven itself. It's proven its worth.
In hurricane season 2005, the ships of the Ready Reserve Force proved themselves much more valuable than a lot of people realized. Future hurricane seasons are sure to hold danger. They may also hold other opportunities for service for MARAD ships and merchant mariners.